guys, I want to get into it now. Getting back to the Yoga Vasistha. This is a very exciting section that I want to talk about because what we're really going to do here is bridge the gap between Bhakti and an Advaita perspective, right? Advaita, as we see it now, feels like a very... There is a sense, it is what I refer to as a benign nihilism to it, right? Because it's not really prescriptive. It's really more of a kind of positivist or normatizing view of what reality is, which is everything is just consciousness, right? That's all it is, and that's what we're given with it. But in a story that I'm going to talk about here from the Yoga Vasistha, we kind of see how we can bridge the gap there a little bit, right? And this is the story of, and this is Adi's favorite story, the story of Prahlada, right? And of course, of the Narasimha avatar of Vishnu, right? That the lion man himself who came, and Adi, you love the story of Hiranyakashipu and his son Prahlada. Mm-hmm. Prahlada was a great devotee, a great bhakt of Lord Vishnu, and his father, Hiranyakashipu, has a great beef, no pun intended, perhaps beef, beef pun intended, right? Because his elder brother, Hiranyaksha, was killed by Lord Vishnu, right, in the Varaha avatar. Because he had been terrorizing the earth and was basically, he was an environmental eco-terrorist of sorts, right? He was like a horrible, like a chemical corporation. You could think of it as like a cock brother type figure, and basically trying to subsume the earth, you know what I mean? And tormenting Bhumi Devi, as we know her. And of course, Lord Vishnu came in the boar form, took him out, right? And then his younger brother, Hiranyakashipu, has a huge beef against Lord Vishnu. And what does he do? He's persecuting all the bhakts of Lord Vishnu, foremost of which is his son Prahlada. And Prahlada is a highly devoted bhakt of him, and he is saved and rescued. All the bhakts of Lord Vishnu are rescued from him through the form of Narasimha, where he is not a man, not a beast, but both. And he kills him not at day or night, but in between the two at dusk, and not indoors or outdoors, but on the threshold of his home.
The veranda.
Exactly. And he kills him. That's the long and short story of Narasimha, Prahlada, and Hiranyakashipu. So we're talking about the aftermath of this. And what I love is that in the Yoga Vasistha, what we're really seeing is a retelling of so many different stories, right? But they're all retellings of it from an Advaita kind of perspective, of this non-dualist perspective. The Yoga Vasistha itself is a retread of the Balakanda of the Ramayana, right? And a specific section of it, which is right when Vishwamitra arrives at the court to take Rama out on his first mission, if you will, to destroy the demons, interrupting his yajnas. So this is a retelling of the story of Narasimha and Prahlada, but really specifically it gives the aftermath of that story, where Prahlada now reigns over the demons, right? The Asuras. And it's a very fascinating thing, first of all, that the Asuras can also be devotees, right? And it's a very, again, this is a big difference between the Dharmic phase in Hinduism and what we see in the big three over in the West, right? They have very Manichaean, black and white ideas of good versus evil, whereas things are very much on a continuum here, and they're on the continuum according to the three gunas, actually, more than anything else. The Asuras are more tamasic and rajasic, right? That's their imbalance, right? But you do within that find great devotees. Ravana, as we know, was a great bhakt of Lord Shiva, right? He was half Brahmin, half Rakshas, half Asura, right?
No, half Rakshasa.
Half Rakshasa, right? And I don't know, we can get into, I guess, the kind of taxonomy of Rakshasa versus Asura at some point.
If you want to see that episode, guys, let us know.
Yeah, let us know, actually.
That's a great episode.
It actually is a great... because
there's a deep taxonomy there.
There really is, right? Because then you also have the Devas versus the actual gods, right? These are celestial...
Devas versus Asuras.
Versus Yakshas, and also all these other different classes of celestial beings. Anyway, Prahlada is a hardcore Vishnu bhakt, and what I love about the story in the Yoga Vasistha is that after all this has happened and his father's been killed by Narasimha, he is now reigning over the demons, right, on Earth. And what happens is his devotion to Lord Vishnu just intensify to the point where he is worshipping him externally. And then at a certain point, he comes to a more non-dualistic worship. He crosses from a dualistic Dvaita sort of worship of Vishnu into a non-dual devotional state where he realizes his own self to be Vishnu. So he begins to worship the Vishnu that is him and within him. Very fascinating. And in doing so, by crossing over to this more non-dualistic worship, Vishnu himself appears to him, right? In his characteristic God fashion, he appears to him gives him the proper darshana of himself, and appears to him in his form as we know, Satyanarayan, with the conch, the discus, the mace. I forget what the fourth thing is, maybe a lotus or something. Yeah. And he comes to Prahlada and he says, okay, listen, you're so devoted, let me grant you a boon, right? Always with the boons. And Prahlada says, I don't honestly even know what to ask for. Your darshana is, of course, the highest thing anyone could grant. He says, give me the highest boon that you can think of, the infinite thing that you can give me. And Lord Vishnu says, okay, what I'm going to grant you is the boon of self-inquiry. From there, Prahlada engages in really the highest form of worship, self-inquiry. That is the highest form of worship. And through this inquiry, we see him come to the conclusion of all Advaita thought, which is that everything is the undivided, undifferentiated, infinite consciousness of self. Right? Self is everything. That is it. And the one thing that he keeps repeating is the same, Brahma as well as a blade of grass is constituted of this. Again, it's an almost atheistic, not even atheistic, but it's a pantheistic view of things actually, but it is actually ultimately a non-dual view of reality. As we've discussed in previous sections on the Yoga Vasistha, even the gods themselves are constructed of this reality. Even we are all subject to the same thing, right? Which is this undifferentiated, undivided consciousness. And from there, he goes on a sort of tear, a long soliloquy on the nature of self-inquiry, including what I consider to be this hymn. And this is just the beginning of it. O self, free from the mire of ego sense, salutations to you. O self, in whom the fearsome senses and all-consuming mind have attained quiescence, salutations to you. O self, in whom the lotus of bliss has fully blossomed, salutations to you. O self, whose two wings are consciousness and its reflection, and who dwells in the lotus of the heart, salutations to you. O self, the sun that dispels the darkness of ignorance in the heart, salutations to you. O self, the promoter of supreme love and the sustainer of all things in the universe, salutations to you. And he just keeps going on about this. We are worshiping the self here. And to me, this is the great bridge between dualism and non-dualism, between Dvaita and Advaita. And it's through this sort of krama, which I call krama, is a term that we use mostly in Tantra, and it means succession, and it is the process. But here we see the succession of the process between bhakti and non-dualistic worship, right? Devotion of the deity, and then ultimately results in the devotion of the self. And that's why it was a great gift from Lord Vishnu. Prahlada's worship of Vishnu was a progression, a succession of worship of him as the ultimate deity apart from himself, then the deity within himself, and that was a precursor to the worship of the self itself. And when a boon was granted by Lord Vishnu, he was finally able to progress to that worship of the self and the self alone. And as, of course, Vasistha explains it to Lord Rama, it was the self of Prahlada that generated in itself devotion to Vishnu. Prahlada obtained from Vishnu, who was his own self, the boon of self-inquiry, and through such self-inquiry attained self-knowledge. At times, one attains self-knowledge through self-inquiry undertaken through self-effort. At times, this self-effort manifests as devotion to Vishnu, who is also the self, and thus one attains enlightenment. So, Vasistha then goes on, basically, to say that the cult of devotion to Vishnu has been founded with the intention of possibly inducing those people who have turned away from the study of scriptures, from the self-effort and from self-inquiry, to do something good. Determined and persistent self-effort is considered the best. In its absence, other forms of worship are prescribed. If there's complete mastery of the senses, of what use is worship? And if there's no mastery of the senses, of what use is worship? Right? Very fascinating to me. And if you are successful in this, here's a final line. If you are successful in this, you have attained perfection. And if not, you are no more than a wild donkey. Sorry, guys. Listen, what he is kind of saying here is that actually worship itself, religion itself, theism itself is kind of retarded, okay? And we are all retarded, actually. This is the thing. We're all subject underneath. You can think of ourselves as one consciousness, which is actually indwelling within all of us. We're not there yet, right? We say this in the Bhagavad Gita as well. Krishna says, listen, my impersonal form is difficult to worship.
Yeah.
That's why you should start with the bhakti, right? Start with the bhakti. There's all these different paths towards it, right? Inquiry, philosophy, yoga, meditation, impersonal worship, worship of the self, essentially. And then, of course, bhakti, and you start with bhakti, right? That is the most important thing to do because we are all retarded. Okay, and this process of succession is deconditioning ourselves of this retardation, essentially. I'm sorry, is that not a proper word to use? Maybe not. You already know what it is here, okay? And that's what we're doing. It's a constant deconditioning of ourselves. And we start by worshiping the external deity. And through that, we start to realize the deity is within us. And then beyond that, we start to worship the supreme consciousness that exists as the self, the ultimate self. And that's what Hinduism is really about, actually. But no matter where you start, if you begin as a bhakti and you end as a bhakti, as a bhakt, right? That's also fine, right? Because it's all about the dissolution of the ego into the deity. And ultimately, you're reaching that same goal, right? Of dissolving of the ego to realize the true self. Heady stuff, right? But to me, I feel like this is really important because we're understanding, well, what is the connection between bhakti and this kind of ultimate, the one true form of worship, which is self-inquiry and worship of the self. And it's not worship of the self like, I am God and I am the almighty, most powerful. That's not what it's about, right? It's not a form of narcissism, right? It is a solipsistic approach, though, however, once you realize that all is divine, right? That we're all made up of this Brahman, of this ultimate consciousness. To me, it's fascinating. It's an important bridge that we cross when we're understanding Advaita and how it is an actual religious school of religiosity or spirituality, right? But this is the place where you go beyond all rituals. You go beyond all that, and it's a pure meditation. It's a pure self-inquiry, pure contemplation. After he gets into the self-inquiry, the demons and everybody's getting a little bit like, whoa, what's up with Prahlada now? And Vishnu has to come again and intervene, and he blows the conch to awaken him out of this other state, right? Out of this non-dualistic state, to be like, hey, listen, this isn't the time to just completely dissolve and relinquish your duties, right? Again, inaction is instead to continue on with your duties as the regent of the asuras, right? And continue your dominion over earth under this asura reign, because the time of the cosmic dissolution is not yet here. And thus we all have to participate in the lila of Maya, right? And that to me is still something that requires a lot of unpacking as well, and a lot of thought and understanding, right? But it does make a certain sense, right? Everything is lila. This is all actually a sort of divine play that's being played out and carried out in every yug, in every yoga, right? He says to him, he's like, the time of cosmic dissolution is not now. So there's no point in giving up your body in this way, or giving up whatever this materiality that has been formed through the power of Maya is like. This stuff is still here, and thus you still have your duties to attend to, right? But the way to attend to all duties, as we know, all the way from the Bhagavad Gita into the Yoga Vasistha, is one does so through a renunciate position, right? Through Tyaga, through all of that stuff. You do everything non-volitionally. Everything is non-volitional. God, there's an amazing quote. It's a Taoist text, actually. This is from the Tao. Do you mind if I read it? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? This is Dharma 101, really. You know what I mean? But again, this is the whole thing, and we talked about this a little bit last time. The desires are of two kinds. There's the true desire, which is just what your actual impulse is, but then there's volitional desire, and those are the things where you're generating karmas, right? But it's through non-volitional desire. That's really doing your duty, right? Can you remain unmoving until the right action arises by itself? Can you remain unmoving until the right action arises by itself? Very heavy thing to say, but to me it's absolutely something straight out of the Yoga Vasistha. Things happen spontaneously. They happen through the course of Dharma itself, the larger Dharma that is carrying us forward in our duties, right? And us living in accordance with those duties. Non-volitional action. And that's what Lord Vishnu tells Prahlada, essentially, is like, you need to just be the renunciate, but don't relinquish your duties, right?
Yeah.
Summing it up, this is the bridge between bhakti and Advaita. This is how the two are linked, and we should never abandon the path of bhakti, actually, on some level or another. It is required of us. We use Maya to go beyond Maya. We use the mind to go beyond the mind into pure consciousness. It is not an easy task, but it is a necessary task, and it is a rewarding task, because all the pleasures we can ever possibly think or imagine to experience are nothing, right? They're things that actually just create more desires, right? One thinks that by satisfying an urge or a craving for something, it's going to satisfy it. No, all it does is it makes the box of desires bigger, where you're just constantly wanting more, right? Aristotle referred to this as a leaky cask, right? And that's all our material desires are. It's just feeding into and creating more and more desires. The true desire is that recognition of the self as the ultimate reality of pure consciousness.